Hello, my dearest friends. The opening chapters of Avraham's life are so vital for an understanding of how the Jew finds his place in this world, not only in his vertical relationship with God, but also in his horizontal relationships and encounters with his fellow human beings who are not part of his immediate clan or ideology. One such encounter occurred after the successful battle with the four kings. After rescuing his nephew Lot, Avraham was greeted by Melchizedek, who was identified as the king of Shalem, the king of Salem, and the priest of El Elyon, literally the God of up high. After presenting Avram with gifts of bread and wine, he offered him the following two-part blessing. Here's the blessing that Melchizedek offers to Avram. He says, Baruch Avram le'el Elyon konei shamayim va'aretz. Blessed is Avram to the God of up high, owner of heaven and earth. The second part of the blessing is Baruch El Elyon asher migein sarecha biyadecha. Blessed is the God of up high, who delivered your oppressors into your hands. The Talmud discusses this narrative and teaches us that Melchizedek was none other than Shem, the son of Noach. Originally, God had intended for the priesthood to exist among all of Shem's descendants. Just as Shem was a Kohen, his descendants would be Kohanim as well. But Melchizedek made an egregious error. His blessing to Avraham was malformed. He first blessed Avram, the man, and only afterwards blessed God. The Talmud states that Avraham criticized Melchizedek for this, and he said, is it proper to bless the servant before the master? As a result, the priesthood was taken from Melchizedek and his future descendants and was transferred only to Avraham and to his descendants. Now, how are we to understand the significance of this story? The Or HaChaim HaKadosh, Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar of the 18th century, suggests that we're misreading this Talmudic narrative. In fact, the kahuna was not stripped from Melchizedek as a punishment as a result of an error. Rather, Melchizedek was quite deliberate and appropriate for blessing Avraham first and then only afterwards God. His rationale was that Avram had succeeded in finding God in the world and had endeared himself to Hashem through his righteousness. As a result, God responded in kind and helped Avraham during his time of need. This is an important lesson, notes Reb Chaim Ibn Attar, in that it teaches us that Hashem will endear himself to those who first endear themselves to him. It was thus quite appropriate for Melchizedek to first bless Avram because he was presenting this cause and effect. Because you, Avraham, sought out God and endeared yourself to him, God came to your aid when you needed him. So why then was the kahuna taken away from Melchizedek if he did no wrong? The Or HaChaim explains that this was not a punishment, and Melchizedek was not stripped of the kahuna. Rather, Melchizedek was so impressed by how Avraham sanctified God's name wherever he went, so he voluntarily gifted Avraham and his future descendants with the kahuna. According to this explanation, when the passage states, Vayiten lo ma'aser mikol, that he gave him a tithe of everything, it does not mean, as Rashi says, that Avraham gave Melchizedek a tithe, but rather Melchizedek, who was now voluntarily relinquishing his priesthood, gave Avraham a tithe, since now Avraham was the new Kohen. That's the Or HaChaim's approach. Now, we humbly offer an alternate approach based on the Or HaChaim's commentary, but one which is more in accord with the simple import of the Gemara, that Melchizedek was actually stripped of his kahuna as a punishment for uttering the blessing improperly by placing Avraham before God. But first, let's ask a basic question. What does it mean to be a Kohen, to be a priest? This person represents divine service to the rest of his countrymen. He is supposed to model that mankind has a duty and a higher calling to act righteously and to serve God. But take note of how Melchizedek identified God. He called him El Elyon, the Lord of up high. This is the God of transcendence. It is the God who was waiting in the heavens for man to find him. He is the God of Aristotle and Maimonides, who depict him as an exalted being who, because of his transcendence, does not conspicuously insert himself into this world, and as such needs to be sought out by man. In this model, the Kohen is needed to help people find this transcendent and elusive God, since most people lack the intellectual clarity to be able to find the pattern of God in existence. But Avraham was different. In the 1950s, Rabbi Avraham Yehoshua Heschel wrote his philosophy of Judaism in his book, God in Search of Man. It was a polemic of sorts against those who argued that man's relationship with God is predicated on his intellect and his rational discovery of God within nature. As the title implies, we err when we think that this is a unilateral process of man searching for God. As much as man seeks out God with his intellectual faculties, it is God who seeks out man even more. That is, Hashem places miraculous stimuli and signals in our purview all the time. Instead of God being so transcendent as to be thought of as a deity who is seated on his lofty throne with his arms folded, waiting for man to seek him out, we should rather imagine God as a father who is actively seeking out his children and who wants nothing more than to have a relationship with them. Rav Heschel cites the following verse from Isaiah. Nidrashti lelo sha'alu. I was ready to be sought out by those who weren't looking for me. I said, Hineini, Hineini. I'm here, to a nation who did not call out my name. Melchizedek erred by thinking that Avraham deserved all the credit for finding God in this world. But to the contrary, all the signs of Hashem are present everywhere, and Avraham was simply the first person of his generation to follow the clues. By placing Avraham before God, Melchizedek failed to see how Hashem had actively sought out Avraham long before Avraham sought out God. Avraham was thus awarded with a new kind of kahuna, one which models to its followers that we serve God not because of our finding him, but rather because he was benevolent enough to seek us out first. This is a sobering message to us all on a number of levels. Firstly, if we do succeed in finding God in our lives, it's certainly to our credit that we have chosen to do such a counterculture type of attitude in a time when God has been excised from the public square and where God, if I dare say it, has even become a four-letter word. But at the same time, we shouldn't be so quick to pat ourselves on the back for being self-made in our discovery. Hashem has been yearning for our discovery of him and was placing the breadcrumbs along the path long before we found them. Furthermore, we look at all the civil unrest in our world today, the tensions and the anxieties of a society fraught with economic and health fears amidst the pandemic. So many have written a deity out of their personal narratives because they seek personal autonomy, which has become the golden calf of our era. But look at the ideological price that personal autonomy demands from those who adhere to it. Nothing happens for a reason, and we and only we control our destinies. If the world is struck with illness and pain, it's completely arbitrary. No flare has been shot from a divine source, and there's nothing to learn. This aimless approach is so fraught with nihilism, leaving people feeling that life has no purpose or meaning. That's the real pandemic of our times. Sure, we'll get over COVID, but will we survive the pandemic of a purposeless existence? You know, the United States is coming upon an election next week. The country is more polarized and filled with contention than it has been for over 50 years, probably since the Vietnam War. Regardless of the outcome of the elections, it is incumbent upon every person who is a descendant of Avraham the Kohen to see the divine message in all that is happening in the world around us. We're not sure that we'll be able to articulate with absolute clarity what that message is, nor if the message is so universal to be the same for each and every one of us. But one thing is clear, there is a message, and it is Hashem who is seeking us in that message. Whether it's a call to make aliyah, or a call to return to a life of Torah and mitzvot with greater fervency, we can ill afford to ignore the message. And may we see that message before it's too late, so that we can be part of the messianic redemption. May we see it b'mehera b'yameinu amen. I wish you a peaceful, healthy Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos. May the world be filled with peace and with healing and with the sense of brotherhood among all of mankind. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos.